Southern Arizona offers a unique opportunity for a second chance summer garden. One of the most effective ways to make the most of gardening in Southern Arizona is to plant with the monsoons. The monsoon season brings thunderstorms from mid-June until September, and that makes the desert plants come alive. By planting with the rains, your garden can come alive too. Here are some tips to planting and maintaining a monsoon garden in Southern Arizona. In Southern Arizona, we have two opportunities to grow heat-loving plants, one in the spring and one in late summer. The key to being successful with your monsoon garden is choosing varieties that will be productive quickly enough to fit our short gardening window. You can start seeds in mid-June to plant out in the garden in mid-July through August for your monsoon garden. If you want to get a head start on your monsoon garden, you need to start your seeds inside now. Things like tomatoes, eggplants, peppers, and tomatillos are good choices. If you don't have the equipment to start seeds indoors or you don't want to do that, you can always buy transplants at a local nursery and then transplant those out into your garden. Tomatoes are everybody's favorite, and the key to good tomato production is choosing varieties that have a short maturity date. That means 50 to 80 days. Cherry, grape, and cocktail tomatoes do best in the heat. Romas do well too, but keep in mind if you want to grow larger varieties of tomatoes, those take longer to reach maturity, and that's a little bit tricky with fitting them into our short season. When it's time to move your transplants outside, you need to expose them to heat and sun gradually in a process called hardening off. For the first few days, move your transplants outside for just an hour or two, and then over the next few days, gradually increase that time. When I first bring my plants outside, I move them under the dappled shade of an old mesquite tree, or I have a table that I've made with sawhorses and a couple of old boards. I've pounded in stakes on each of the four corners and attached shade cloth to that, and that is my hardening off setup. It's very easy. It's something that I already had, so it costs me nothing. This whole process from inside to in the garden usually takes a couple of weeks. Even though your plants have become accustomed to outdoor conditions, they may need a little extra care. You may need to provide some shade in the form of shade cloth and a little extra watering until their roots get established. That process is just for seedlings that you've started from seed indoors. There are lots of other things that you can start outdoors in mid-July through August that will do great by direct sowing in the garden. Okra, melons, summer squash, winter squash, cucumbers, corn, beans like black-eyed peas, bush or pole beans, and tepary beans, amaranth, sunflowers, and basil. The nice thing about directly sowing out in the garden is that you don't have to go through that whole hardening off process. However, I have had trouble with birds sometimes plucking my seedlings right out of the soil. So oftentimes I will cover my seedlings with a little cage or some sort of a cloth to keep them safe from the birds and other critters until they get big enough that they're not as interesting to them. For germinating seeds and seedlings, you need to provide water more often than you would for established plants. I water my garden twice per week, deeply. I use flood irrigation because I'm using recessed beds. Sometimes they're called basin beds or a sunken garden. And I will just flood that bed completely with water twice a week to make sure that I'm watering very deeply. It's important to water deeply, so you want to run your water slowly and over a longer period of time, because that way that water is going to soak deeply down into the soil and roots are going to follow the water. So if you want your plants to be more resilient to drought and heat conditions, you want their roots to be very deep and well established. I like to monitor the moisture in my soil using this. This is a moisture meter, and this is a really inexpensive tool. You can pick this up at any hardware store or garden nursery. I think I paid maybe $10 or $12 for this thing. I just push it into the soil to the depth of the root zone. This will be different depending on the plant and at different times during its maturity. For example, a tomato seedling will have a rooting depth of about 6 inches, while a mature tomato plant will have a rooting depth at 2 feet. That's very different than a radish or a lettuce plant. Rooting depth is plant dependent. I like to water my garden in the morning. That way it has good hydration throughout the entire day when it's the hottest. I don't like watering my garden at night because the humidity is higher and the temperature is lower, and that will promote fungal problems. If you have your garden irrigated with an automatic timer, then set that timer for around dawn so that it can get nice and watered before the sun comes up. If you're watering by hand, go on out there in your bunny slippers. Whether you're watering by hand or automatically, it's important to set a consistent schedule so that your plants don't get water stressed. Water stressed plants become sick plants. They're also a target for pests. Monsoon season has really high temperatures, and because of that, you can either use a layer of mulch like straw or alfalfa, or in my case, I'm using a deep composting method this season just to see if that works as well. Deep composting is exactly what it sounds like. You add a thick layer of compost to the top to conserve moisture and to keep the plant roots from drying out. I'm also experimenting with a living mulch this year. I'm planting white clover, and I'll let you know how that goes in a later video. Eggplant, chili, and tomato fruits can get sunburn or sun scald, and so in order to prevent that from happening, you need to provide shade. You can provide shade by putting up shade cloth for them, or you can even plant them underneath taller plants like sunflowers and amaranth and corn. I have another video about that I will link here, and you can check that out in more detail. I built a cheap and temporary shade structure here over my tomatoes, and they're powering through these 100+ degree days. The monsoon season brings rain, moisture, humidity, and pests. The pests are coming. The best way to prevent pests from getting out of control is to monitor. I am that crazy neighbor lady who you can see wandering around her garden every early morning in her bathrobe, and I am not ashamed. I look under leaves, I look in blooms, and I check for overall plant health. And you would be surprised at how many pests that you can catch in the early stages just by monitoring. It's best to catch the pests early when you can handle those populations rather than when they're totally out of control. Another great pest prevention method is to plant habitat and nectar sources for beneficial insects. Let the beneficial insects do the heavy lifting. That way you only have to intervene when things get out of hand. Maintaining a monsoon garden involves regular care and monitoring. Things like weeding, cleaning up plant debris, removing diseased plants are in the gardening world called cultural controls. Keeping up with these jobs will keep your space happy and healthy. I hope that you are feeling inspired and prepared and ready to plant your monsoon garden. Embrace the monsoon season and take a second chance at a summer garden.